Hi, thanks for downloading, listening to, and watching the Lean Into Artcast, a show where two visual storytellers get together and take on various kinds of topics that come up in and around making things to communicate ideas primarily with visuals. Not always only with visuals, but primarily with visuals. You know, how do you think about design? How do you think about composition, pacing, flow? How do you think about all the stuff that goes into living the lifestyle, the life of uncertainty that comes with being a visual storyteller? We think really hard about this stuff, so you will too. My name is Jerzy and Rob. I'm a cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is?
I am Rob Stenzinger, a user experience and game designer. I'm just like shaking off this uncertainty the whole life.
I've been talking, it's the end of the school year, and I'm talking with a lot of students who are like in high school and going off to college. And, you know, that question comes up about, you know, if they decide to get into a field like mine, making comic books, one of the pieces of advice I give them is like, well, you have to learn to be very comfortable with uncertainty, because I don't think there's guarantees in any field, but there are fields that have more structural systemic stability, maybe. Maybe.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to arrive at that too. So it depends on let's see, like, what are the factors in your ecosystem? How many hats are you wearing to accomplish your primary job? And what's your appetite for all those things? Because I think you crank up a certain aspect of the challenge of working with uncertainty by being independent as well, right? I don't know. Is that fair?
I think that's reasonable. But I want to be careful. I know in the past I know I've been guilty of glamorizing the heroic journey of being alone and independent and facing that uncertainty. And you know, that as if to say that like this cartooning life is this special, exalted, noble life that only this privileged people who work really hard and face fears can live through. When the truth is that everybody's struggling in their own way. Everybody has their own battles to face, and I don't want to be too myopic about it. But there is a large degree of uncertainty that comes with it anyway. I've been saying that a lot lately.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, being more specific. I mean, so you have the aspect of you know, you yourself, maybe you have commitments, and then you have this whole pipeline of like, well, when are you working on something? When will you be, you know, billing for it? And how does that whole process work? Which I know we've talked a little bit about, but like, then there's what about the next work and the work after that and the work after that? And what about the complementary work that goes on in parallel, or, you know, maybe even multiple commitments that are compatible enough? Where
I am finding the path to get into our topic today, thanks to you, with that specificity, because I'm thinking about this a lot right now. In that, rockets, which I've been talking about for the last couple weeks on the show, months actually. I mean, if you want to talk about like mentioning it on the show, but like really kind of hammering on it in the last couple weeks because it comes out June 12th, and here's the uncertainty at the beginning. Can we make this book? Can we make it the time that's needed? What are the print specifications? What are the page specifications? What are the topics we want to cover in it? Are these jokes good? Are we covering this material in a way that's respectful and accurate? Okay, we got through all that uncertainty. We did it. Now it's like, oh, the book's coming out. Are we going to promote this thing properly? Are we going to get people excited about us? They'll buy it. Then the publisher will say, wow, these people sell a lot of books. We should give them another book to do. So it's like this never-ending churn of uncertainty, right?
Well, you have in some ways it's like uncertain trajectories in between like milestones or like checkpoints, right? Because you can't really be doing the promoting until the thing exists and is, you know, ready to go to press and all that kind of stuff. Or you have to be at a certain point of certainty to then say, yay, time for the next uncertainty.
Yeah. So, but in that first churn of uncertainty, there was this notion of the production pipeline, getting the book, just getting it done. And I'm gonna tee up a couple balls for the second half of the show for us to think about while I'm doing this. We're gonna do some digital coloring today and doing some demos on screen. We'll be talking through it for the folks who are listening in the audio. But this notion of fighting or navigating that uncertainty and trying to hit those milestones, in doing that, efficiency becomes a very, very alluring thing, right? Finding ways to do things more efficiently, more speedily, becomes something that's a tremendous asset to hitting that milestone, right? But when does the efficiency become purely mechanical, or does it? Like, can we hit a point where it's like, well, now we're just focusing on getting it done rather than actually making it good, right? What's that tension look like when you're navigating that, right? And what kind of trade-offs come with greater efficiencies? We'll talk about that in the second half of the show, but in the first half of the show, we're going to actually do some digital coloring. Are you ready for this, Rob? Are you ready to hit the music? All right.
Let's jump in.
Well, we'll jump in like this with this. Get intense, and I'm going to do a screen share.
I like it when you do these screen shares, the demos.
Yeah?
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I mean, it's tense as the music is. I have a sense of optimism.
I could do this. So what are we looking at here? What I've got up on screen is Clip Studio Paint. And this is actually a page from Rockets. This is, I want to say, from chapter 10, I think. It's someplace in the 80s range. I specifically chose it because it has a bear on a trampoline, which if you come see me and Ann at any of our book signings and talks we're going to be doing in the next couple of months, this is actually the moment that practically inspired the entire book. Was a bear on a trampoline. I'll tell the whole story at the book signing, but nowhere else. You have to come to the book signing to hear that story about a bear on a trampoline. Anyway, so
worth it.
Yeah, I hope so. So this was drawn primarily in Clip Studio Paint. Some stuff was done on paper, and then Ann and I collaborated on the colors as well. And what I thought I would do first is show off, revisit a flatting technique that I use in Clip Studio Paint. And this one I think is specific to Clip Studio Paint. I don't know if you can do this as easily in Photoshop or Metabang or Fire Alpaca. But let me turn off my flats layers real quick. So all my inks are grouped into a folder here. And if you look in the layer palette on the far right, I've got it highlighted right now. And you probably remember this, Rob. You can actually make layer folders and layers themselves into what are called reference layers. And that is this little lighthouse icon at the top of the layer palette in between the blue pencil and the weird looking hamburger thing. I have my inks folder, which it's all my panels of inks, right, that are grouped into subfolders. You can group your layers and folders for better organization. And I tap that lighthouse icon. We can see now next to my inks folder, there is a lighthouse icon indicating this is now considered what's called a reference layer. And what that does is when I choose the paint bucket tool, and with Clip Studio Paint, as with a lot of these drawing apps now, the tools that you choose have a bunch of sub-tool settings. In Metabang Paint, the options change at the top of the screen. In Clip Studio Paint, it's like sort of a pop-up menu on the side that I'm opening and closing right now. I'm toggling it. And there's several different kinds of fill bucket tools you can have. You can have just like your regular paint bucket, but then there's one that's called Refer Other Layers. And down below that in the tool property palette, you can change what kinds of ways your paint bucket interacts with your layers. Like if you've used something like Photoshop or Metabang, you can say refer to all layers, right? You can say refer to the canvas or refer to the layer. And so if you refer to the canvas, it interacts with all the layers at once as if they're all on one layer, right? This is the same kind of idea, except you can target specific layer groups. So I'm going to make sure that I have multiple. Let's see if I can highlight this with a screen grab real quick. Right down here in the tool property palette, there's this option to choose multiple layers with the Refer Other Layers paint bucket. And we're going to make sure that we choose the reference layer right there. See that?
see.
Make sure that that's selected. Turn on area scaling to 1 pixel. We're going to scale it up by 1, and we're going to hit stop filling at center line of vector underneath the multiple layers toggle. Why? Because
who gave that tip? This is one that popped up after.
This was Alina who gave this to me
yeah.
years ago. Yes, yes, Alina gave me this tip years ago, and it just made flatting utterly a breeze. It's so easy now, because now when I'm selected on my flats layer, I can take my paint bucket and let's choose a nice green. That's good enough. If I tap inside of that, oh, what's going on here? Do I have some other layers selected? Oh, I guess I have some on my panel 1 layer. I have some gradients in there. Let's just go to one of these other panels here. Okay, here we go. I tap inside of here, right? And it just fills it, but not only does it fill the empty space, but if I hide my inks layer or inks folder, it's filled underneath the black lines as well. And what's more is if I say go up to Konstantin Silkovsky here and fill in his jacket a little bit. Wait a minute, why is that not doing it?
Was it
area
doing
scaling?
Okay.
There we go. And if I hide him,
those lines they have a very sort of dry, brushy texture to them. They're very so I would imagine. So you're trying to avoid, I think, like the jaggies, right? The little.
Yes. I know what I did wrong here. There's some of the inks are on a different layer, so I'm gonna hide those. There we go. And so so like we'll ink the contours like on paper, import them, and then or do the interior contours on paper and then import them, and then do the outer contours in vector. I'm sorry, I got that mixed up. So anyway, so what that does, that allows me to like easily fill this in. And when I hide the ink layers, and I was dropping paint bucket, make sure you're on the right layer. Look at that. I was on the wrong layer. Go to my flats layer. There we go. So now if I hide my inks, we could look, we see like we got like perfectly, pristine flats where there's no white dots in between, and the colors meet up exactly, right? So anyway, enough of that. I just wanted to quickly
and that
remind
helps as far as the end result when you go to print, right? Really.
Yeah. That you want really good with this, what's called trapping, how tightly your colors match up. And then there's even a thing called making what are called under blacks, which is where you like make a very fine black line underneath your black line, so that I think the mix is 60% CM, Y, and K, or is it CM and Y? I can't remember. Which also helps with your trapping. But you could probably do like a YouTube search for like how to do trapping. We won't cover that in this. This is more about like just doing digital colors. But I just want to quickly run through that. One of the advantages why I use Clip Studio Paint so much is for that reason. Okay, so now what happened with, there he is. Somehow I'm going to close this out and reopen it, because something happened to that file. Okay, there we are. We're back to normal. Okay.
You have some experiments?
Yeah, I had some experiments in there. Okay. So here's what it looks like when it's flatted. I'll hide the inks one more time so you can see like there's no white spots. Every pixel is covered with color, right?
Wow.
Now, so a very speedy way, I've been working on a few freelance projects lately, and a speedy way I use to do coloring. Of course, there's a million ways to do the coloring in comics, right? And when I have my preference, when I have time, I actually like to do it more like as if I was coloring it on paper, where I'm actually mixing the color pixels together. So I'll make a flats layer and I'll make a colors layer, which is a copy of the flats. I modify the flats. So let's say this is it. I'll say this is called colors, and underneath it is an exact copy or almost exact copy of that layer, right? And I don't touch the flats layer from here on out. I lock that layer up, so I can't do anything to it by accident. And then on my colors layer, I would go in with my magic wand tool, one item at a time, and I would actually, this is how I colored Boulder and Fleet, by the way. I would pick like a shadow color and I'll very gently mix it in and then select that color of the mix of the two colors, and I would start just gently brushing in the shadow color like so. Then I would go in with like a dry brush. Oops, get out of my way, Windows menu. And whoop, I keep hitting that. There we go. Okay. And then I would start to mix it in with like more of a dry brush effect like so. And I might even, work in like a rim light on them with like some of that blue. Very gently scrub in a little bit of that blue. Are you seeing what I'm doing? Is that even
I'm seeing what you're doing. So like, yeah, and you're describing all the steps along the way. I'm just curious. I'm curious about your color choice. Like, why did you choose the blue? I know we're talking about the speed of the process, and I see like by doing the lasso selections and whatnots. I mean, you basically you can do big muscular movements, I imagine, and be at low risk for colors going in the wrong spot. But then,
yeah, that's exactly it, right? So like by using my lasso tool, not the lasso tool, the magic wand tool, I can only paint where that color exists right now. And then supposing I stop coloring, move on, and do some more editing over here, and then realize, oh, you know what? I need a little bit of orange on the right side of my polar bear here. Well, it makes it hard to select it again when you've already edited the color. That's why I keep the flats layer. So I can go to my flats layer,
nice.
deselect, right? Select that color again, go back to my colors layer, and now I can add that orange that I see right here. Just
does the select tool use that whole reference lighthouse feature too?
It does. Yes, you're getting ahead of me, buddy, because yes, I can also say I can set that flats layer to be, if I unlock it, I can set it to be a reference layer. And then now I messed with this before. So you can set the magic wand to refer other layers to select, set it to be the reference layer. And even though if I'm on my colors layer, but see, it's still selecting. That's interesting. It's still selecting the colors above it too, even though I've got the flats layer selected. I've run into this before. I am going to use that technique in a minute because like what I'm showing you right now is actually the slow way that I color. So this is the way I color when I actually have time to do it.
Okay.
But there's a even faster way, and it's kind of an old way. I remember I learned this from Audra Farici like 10 years ago, and I break it out from time to time when I'm like, oh, I'm really under pressure on this one, and it gives you just about as good an effect, but in my experience, it goes much faster. So what I do is I'm just going to go ahead and delete these layers because I want to actually set them up on camera. So next thing I'll do is after I've got my flat layer done, I'll make two new layers above it. And the first one I'm going to call shadows. I set that layer mode to multiply, right? We can set layers to have different mixing modes with that drop down at the top of the layer palette. And then I'm going to go to the next layer above that and call this one highlights. And this one, I'm going to set its layer mode to be either lighten or screen, one of the layer modes that mixes the color and brightens what's underneath it while mixing in that color. Multiply mixes the color beneath it, or mixes your color with the color beneath it and darkens it somewhat. I'll show you what I mean. And I'm going to set my shadows layer to be 50% or so, just to start with. Highlights I'll set to be the same. I usually wind up adjusting this over time, but just as a starting point. So now I'm going to set my colors, my flats layer or my color layer, whichever you want to use on this case, to be my reference layer. Now I'm going to go to shadows, my shadows layer, and I'm going to use the magic wand, and I'm going to tap on this dog here, and you can see that it's selecting the colors from the flats layer, even though I'm working on a blank layer right now, right? That's where that using the magic wand with the reference layer feature comes in handy for me. Now, I keep in my color palette a shadows swatch and a highlight swatch. And these are ones that I generally use. And the shadows swatch is what is the HSV value on that? 236H 18S 36V. It's like a darkish bluish purple. And then I'll just go in with like a textured brush. And let's use my wet textured brush that I got from Ray Friendon at friendon.com. And then I'll just, while it's selected with the magic wand tool, I'll just scrub in the shadow like so. And as you can see, what happens is that it's mixing that purple with all of the surrounding colors. So that green on the bottom of this dog's vest that I just colored in added that purple to it and darkened it slightly. And then the gray fur added that purple and darkened slightly. So it's not the same color shadow, right? The shadow changes color when it interacts with different colors. Does that make sense?
It does. And I would guess that leads to less muddy looking
yes.
shadows.
And there's less guesswork in terms of like working out the color theory on it. Because as long as you have really good flat colors, then this light or this darkish purplish color will make really good shadows just about on everything, right? Here's where we get to that. I'm going to turn on, go to my color swatch picker and choose transparent pixels so I can just scrub out a few little bits of fur. There we go. And you can see that didn't take very much time. Now, while this is selected, I'm going to go to my highlights layer and I'm going to choose my highlight color, which is like a pale yellow. Depends on what the lighting is of the scene, right? If like this is like a summer day, somebody use like a lightish yellow. But if they were like, say, in an underground cavern in like a mine or something, you'd probably want to use a reddish color. Or if it was late at night, you'd use a bluish color. So anyway, but then I'm just going to take my gradient tool, my circle gradient, and just like drag a quick little circle so that the dog is just encompassed in like the first third of it. And then that yellow is encountering the shadow layer and the color layer, and it's mixing them all together. So now we're getting like some nice, nicely mixed colors. And I can move the shadow layer above if you want the shadows to be more pronounced. See how that changed? I'll move it back down. Do that. So that's with the highlights above the shadows. There's the shadows above the highlights. So how strong you want the shadows to be, you can actually monkey with that after the fact. We can monkey with the opacity after the fact, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're getting a lot of mileage out of just essentially 2 layers, one for highlights, one for shadows.
And you just do that for the whole darn page. So now I'm going to go to the second dog and just, use the magic wand to just tap, tap, tap and select all the colors in the dog. Choose my shadow color, go to my shadow layer. Right? Just quick little scrubs. And so you can color a page fairly quickly this way. Like I think I mentioned on the show before, John Romita's deadline style. Did we talk about this?
Yeah, like refresh my memory here. So deadline style is that sort of the like get it done with it's almost
yes.
It's like the techniques, like just like this one that you mentioned that you learned from Audra Farici, but for some reason it's you don't use them all the time. Like that's what I don't get. It's like, why isn't deadline style your permanent style?
That is a legitimate question. This takes me back to that discussion we had about the Boulder and Fleet friendly game cover, where you pointed out like what I consider to be a failure cover. You were like, that's minimum viable product cover. And I looked at it again. I was like, you're right. That could have been a product. And I just didn't see it. So yes, let's save that for the second half of the show. Like, why doesn't this become my permanent style? So there, like now I selected the sky. Again, highlight color, exact same color. It's in my swatches. Just quickly drag a gradient and boom, now we got some sunlight in there, right? And this hasn't taken that long. How long have we been going? Oh
yeah, just like 10 minutes, but lots of explanation.
Yeah, so like same, okay, let's do the trees real quick. Just select them, and you can set your magic wand to select all colors in that layer that are that color. So I'm going to make sure on my highlights layer, quickly drag a gradient, and then if I want to, I can go ahead and grab my shadow color. And let's cheat even more, Rob. Let's be super cheaters. And I'm going to go ahead and grab
reveal the secrets. What's up? What's going on?
A foliage brush that comes with Clip Studio Paint. Go to my shadows layer and blah 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 blah. Right. This is what I would do if I was in a hurry to get this page done. Get it out the door. And the foliage brush it's like a pattern brush, right? It just repeats and rotates a pattern of shapes that add up to what look like tree branches and leaves, foliage, right?
Right. So, and that's the thing.
Yeah,
you could,
go ahead.
Use the one that exists, but if you wanted to, you could create your own.
It's super easy to make your own. It's very easy to make your own. So yes, like I have in here some star fields and some different foliages that I've made just by drawing like a couple leaves and a couple branches, and then you just like you can make it into a brush and then set how it rotates and interacts with itself. All right, so there. Now, let's do I'm just going to finish this panel. Let's just go all the way, shall we? Again, go to my highlights layer, choose the highlight color, drag a quick gradient, maybe a little stronger, shadows layer, grab my dry brush, grab my shadows color, and quickly scrub that in.
Okay.
And then maybe just do a few little streaks just to give this fence like a little bit of extra dimensionality.
Yeah, you're just hitting up the boards near the borders and stuff.
Not very much farther to go. Now we'll do the polar bear real quick. Highlights probably won't interact with him very much because he's so bright. Yes, he is. So let's just go and use white. There we go. Use white as the highlight color. Go to the shadows layer, choose my shadow color, grab the brush. I mean, granted, this is easier. I'm working on a VioZ canvas where I can actually draw right on the screen, but this wouldn't be too hard with, like an Intuos tablet, I would argue.
Right. I mean, all these techniques would transfer.
And you can see that as we get closer to where the highlight is stronger, like, so I did like a gradient, a circular gradient on the polar bear towards the top of his head. The shadows get lighter as we get closer to the light source as well, because it's underneath the highlights layer. So once again, if I put it above the highlights layer, the shadows get much more pronounced and stronger. But I'm leaving them below the highlights layer because I like the way how the shadows, as you get closer to the light source, diminish in strength.
Where, I mean, if we were doing something that was more simulating the behavior of light and shadow, I think the opposite would happen, right?
Is that? Yeah, that probably is true. Yeah, actually, you're absolutely right.
It's aesthetically pleasing. So, I mean, that's what matters, right? But
well, I mean, I want to point people at Brandon Dayton's. Let me pull it. I got it pulled up on my screen here. Brandon Dayton has a marvelous video on his method for coloring comics, and it's at his YouTube channel, Brandon Dayton. And in it, he talks about how like he likes to think about like light as a way to create a sense of focus on things too. And he does a lot like this really cool vignetting technique, but he's also talking about like this is a narrative tool for like drawing the eye, and creating, like in this case, I'm also trying to create a sense of weight. All right, so
and it does that. It totally does that job. And pointing that out, I wasn't trying to open up the Pandora's box of
were you well actually me, Rob?
Pedantry, but it's one of those things where, I mean, your goals are accomplished in that, like, there is a more 3D look to all the elements that you've added these shadows and highlights, right? You've got a sense of atmosphere, and then and honestly, that pointing out, like, emphasizing the job of clear communication is what you were probably going for, instead of saying, well, we're going for, realistic atmospheric perspective,
right?
And,
another reason I picked this page, speaking of realism, is that we have Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the who's called the father of Russian cosmonautics, talking with who's like from the 1800s, early 1900s, talking with 16th century German rocket maker Johann Schmidlapp with Belka and Strelka cosmonaut dogs and a polar bear. And they're talking about the page itself while they're in the page, right? Like in the final panel, Tsiolkovsky points back to panel 1 to talk about how the laws of motion work with the bear on the trampoline. So yeah, we're dealing with like not a realistic story here,
but it's but as a communication tool, it's highlighting so many things that comics can do, and also having having a story where, I mean, all these elements are bending to both your narrative and your jokes, and conveying the lesson, right, and the information.
Hopefully. Buy the book. So here's one more thing that I like about doing this technique, like that keeps things speedy for me, is that since I am working with all my shadows are the same color on one layer on their own, and because I have transparent pixels to paint with, I can subtract from these to create effect as well. So if I grab, well, let's grab this grass brush that I made a while back, and I'm painting with negative pixels over top of the shadow. You see what's happening? I'm sort of subtracting.
Painting with negative pixels. What is this? How did you start doing that?
So well, once I saw that you could actually choose negative, you could change to transparent ink color. I was like, well, what would you do that for? And then it dawned on me that, oh, you can actually erase in the shape of your brush, which is actually pretty cool, which actually isn't that strange. I've been taking a watercolor class lately. And yeah, you do exactly that with water. You can erase your paint by adding water to it and then taking like a little piece of t-shirt or like some paper towel and like sop that color right out of there. And I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly the same way, but with like a lot less control. So, okay. Oh, one more thing. Let's get the, I'm going to do the little lining around the trampoline, and then we're done, you know. Now go to my shadows layer, quickly draw, you know, scrub in a shadow around there. Boom. And we've finished coloring panel 1, right, in that time.
Yeah.
I know we got to move on, but I do want to, there's like, I think 1 or 2 more things that I wanted to show. This came up like just yesterday, where I turned in a page of colors for a freelance gig, and the client said, oh, you know what? That's the wrong hue. Remember, it was in the script, and I looked in the script and like, oh my gosh, they're right. I colored all this stuff green. It was supposed to be red. Now, this is where this kind of digital illustration becomes super fun and useful, is supposing, let's go ahead and fill these. Let's play with this real quick. I'm going to make the background color green on these last 2 panels real quickly. And suppose you get that note where you're like, oh, I did. Well, let me also put a highlight and shadow on them. Let's go highlight, my highlights layer. Nice glow in there. And then the shadow, let's do the old Sunday comic strip lighting technique, where you create that like sort of angled corner of shadow in the box, right? Okay, so now I've done my highlight and my shadow. It's like, oh, fudge. Well, changing the color is simple enough, because I've my highlights and shadows are on different layers. I can just toggle those off, choose my red, and drop it in. Or if I don't want to do that, and I want to have the option to basically A/B test, you better like this or better like that, I can select that layer or that panel. Let's go to, I'm going to like do a command or control or command click on the mask on panel 3. That's, you know, the Clip Studio Paint layer panel folders, if you've ever messed with those. So that just basically creates a selection of that panel now. And so now I'm going to go up to layer, new correction layer. In Photoshop, it's called an adjustment layer. I'm going to choose hue, saturation, luminosity as the adjustment. And now I can monkey with, right? I can change the hue of the entire panel. And it's changing what's underneath it too, right? It's changing not only the hue of the flats, but of the highlight and shadow as well. I can change the amount of saturation, but I can, you know, very quickly change it to this reddish.
I mean, those are big. That's an extreme change through,
yeah,
that you're able to manage just in that one panel.
But and I mean, let's do another one where I just change the background color, so I can, you know, go in with my magic wand, go above these to the top of this layer stack in my colors folder, and once again go to layer, new correction layer, hue, saturation, luminosity, and you know, I can scoot the hue over to change it to an entirely different color, and even change the brightness or the saturation and so on, without even changing the the characters' colors, right? But it also adjusts the highlights and shadows. Or I can move it below them that the highlights and shadows remain the yellow and the purple, and the hue, saturation, luminosity layer only affects the flat color underneath, right? This becomes like a really handy tool for like just making really quick on the fly tweaks and adjustments without having to like repaint or re-render anything, right? And then the last one that I would add to this that I think we talked about on the show before, but it's worth revisiting, this is also in Brandon Dayton's video, is using textures. So I'm going to go ahead and open, and I have in my comics folder a brushes and textures folder. And in there, textures, let's go to gesso splatter. And so I've got a series of different kinds of like image textures that you can find lots of these. Look for ones that are labeled for reuse. Give credit where credit is due. This is one that was given out freely by Eddie Crosby, artist on Instagram. Great artist. You should follow him. So now I'm going to like copy this, Command Control C, Control V, paste it over top. And then I'm going to set its layer mode to overlay. And we can see that now it's making the colors interact with everything on there. I'm going to put it above all the colors. And then I'm just going to turn its opacity down to like 17, maybe even 5%. Also, if you have the texture on transparent pixels, like what I have with these, like I got rid of all the white pixels on it, you can lock transparent pixels, and I'll even mix in a color into that. And I'll turn up the opacity so you can see that happen. Watch this. I'm going to change it all to green now. Is it making a difference anywhere? Here, I'll show you in normal layer mode. So, gotta set its expression color to color. There we go. And watch this. So now I've made the texture green. So when I set it to overlay, it interacts that green with everything else, which also gives it kind of like a color harmony throughout the whole page. A lot of artists will do this. They'll just like throw a swash of color over top afterwards to make all the colors have like at least the seed of the same color in it. So they feel like they belong together more, even if they're very distinct, like they are in these panels 3 and 4 versus 1 and 2. But it's kind of hard
like
to see
the color gel.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but very, very, very subtle. But you can see like it adds just like it mixes with the colors, creating just enough color difference, right? It's not so much trying to make it replicate the look of paper, but it's creating just like a little bit of visual interest in the color. And Brandon Dayton even talked about doing. There's an image adjustment you can do in Photoshop where you add noise to the image. You'll add just a tiny bit of noise, just to add a little irregularity to the color, which gives it a little bit more visual interest. So those are some of the speedy things I do, like throwing on a texture like that with a very low opacity to like mix up the color a little bit, make it feel a little bit more visually interesting. Highlight and shadow layer, and then adjustment layers, just to like do quick edits on the fly. And let me see it. Let me close out of this, and I will open up the original again. We can see what it looked like when it was done. There it is with its right. Highlight and shadow layer.
There we go.
I don't think we used any texture layers on these, but yeah.
Yeah, I could see that texture layer being a pretty huge style and design choice, where it's like, this, you know, if an aesthetic is gritty, or you want to show people in some kind of danger, create more attention or something like that, then like you added that sort of green version of the texture earlier when you were experimenting, and that was like, wow, everyone's like sick and gonna die. I don't know what's gonna happen here.
Yeah,
but you know, where now it's just it's crisp. Oh no,
right,
it's coming back.
Right. So yeah, here we go. I mean, let's go ahead and give it like, forgot to set the color expression mode to color. Now fill it in, right, and then set it to overlay. And you can see it like when it's at 100%, it really looks splattery. But then if I just mix it down to like 9%, you can hardly see it. But if you get tight,
wow,
it's very subtle. Right, just creates enough, and who knows how much of that would show up in the print. The Boulder and Fleet comic I did called Mining for Trouble, I used that technique a lot, even though I was doing like the more painted style of the coloring style. So Yeah, so there was the demo. Do you want to move on to the second half and talk about efficiencies in a second?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
I
there's
should have been watching the chat to see if anybody was asking questions.
right. We did have one, but there's let's see. It's like
What's the difference between this method and the shadow or highlights tools under airbrush, or did I miss something? Well, it's the difference is, and that was Troy Shadowing Tronics, is the difference is that we're putting that each on their own layer. I suppose you could use like a brush or an airbrush with set to multiply on a regular layer, but by just putting it as flat color on the layer. And so I'll turn these layers back into regular layer modes. So there's the highlights and shadow layers as just the colors themselves without the layer modes adjusted in any way. That's what it looks like. Okay, so I'll hide the shadow layer. Oh, it looks like on the original version I had the shadows above the highlights. Interesting. Okay. So you can see that it's just like a whole bunch of yellow overlaid over top. But because I have it, I'm just taking advantage of the fact that layers can be reordered and we can mess with the way that the colors all interact with one another. That's the real idea here. Just using layers to speed things up. Although, I mean, I want to say, like, this is one way of doing it that just I, was instructed by somebody on this, and I've like kind of taken and run with it in my own way. But this is just one of many ways to do it. This makes things faster for me. But I taught a Clip Studio Paint class in town here recently for adults, and one of the main critiques I got after the class was, boy, Jerzy, you use a lot of layers. And I do use a lot of layers. I'll open up all of these folders. Yeah, I mean, just my pencils folder alone has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers in it.
And I mean, you're doing that very intentionally. Like, what is that? The big benefit you're getting from the discrete layers?
A lot of flexibility for editing things. Like, for instance, in Brandon's video, he talks about how he doesn't do color holds very much because they're such a pain in the butt to do. Color holds is that technique where you, like, if you look at the trees behind the bear here, the lines are actually a different color. And the reason it's typically a time-consuming thing, and back in the days when I drew everything on the boards, this was very time-consuming because you would literally have to go in with the lasso tool and very carefully trace out the shape and making sure not to intersect any other lines. So like, oh, I've already lost because I've overlapped the panel line, right? And then another layer above, either on a clipping layer or if you have the line art on a transparent layer, you lock the transparent pixels and fill in that line color. But because this is drawn digitally, and each thing is on its own layer. So for instance, the background of this panel, I just toggled it off. You see that?
Yeah.
It's drawn in a completely different layer. So when I do the holds, I don't have to worry about tracing anything over anything, right? I just very sloppily circle around the trees with my lasso tool, and then I can just hit fill and not have to worry about the bear or anything overlapping it because it's on a different layer altogether, right? So things like that get faster. But yes, you wind up with very large files, right? I can't remember which one of my friends was telling me this, but they're telling me when they turned in one of their books recently, the files they turned in were like a couple megabytes a piece at 600 dpi because they were so economical in their layer usage, whereas mine are like 200 megabytes. And they were like, "What's wrong with you, Jerzy?" So I fully acknowledge that this is not going to be for everybody, but it's something to try out if you are up against a nasty deadline, I think. I know John David Guerra, who is the Nightmare Pro Wrestling creator who I'm working with on the new book. I think he does a very similar thing, right? Like he actually renders all of his shadows first, then drops in the flat colors. Oh, one last trick, and I swear to goodness we're going to get out of here and move on to the second half, is another trick that I learned from, I think it was Tony Cliff shared this one on Twitter, is speaking of adjustment layers or correction layers, I'll make a hue, saturation, luminosity adjustment layer and turn the saturation all the way off and put that at the top of my layer stack. And this becomes a thing I can toggle on and off to check my values. Right.
Oh, great.
So I'm not getting distracted by color as much. I can see like how do the values shake out on this? Is everything clear? Does everything read right? Right. And like look at like that rocket color, like the rocket flare on that. Look how dark that is when you look at it in pure value. So that's just like a quick little way to, double check color on your page, your value settings. All right. You ready to go on to the second half, Rob?
Yeah, let's do this. I think we have a little bit of talking about the efficiencies, and it's almost you posed it as maybe. Let's see, maybe they help, but only to a certain point. And I'm curious how we explore that.
I am too. I wonder if there's anything in there. There might not be, but we got other places we can go with it.
Oh no, this one's an empty box.
That's the fun. I'm glad that we get to model that, because that's part of thinking about something, isn't it? Is like hitting a dead end and going like, nope, nothing there. Time to look down another alley, right?
Yeah, not afraid of doing that. I don't think it's a high risk in this situation, but that right. happens when it's like that process of digging into stuff. Sometimes it's empty. There's nothing there, but I don't think that's the case this time. And then watch this. It's actually that's a tease, and then we're like, oh well, show's over.
That's the perfect tease.
Who knows?
Because yes, you get to see whether we succeed or fail in a minute and 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. Stick around to watch either the triumph or the catastrophe. But before we do that, we got to thank some people who make this show possible. Those people happen to be the people who support us on Patreon. Yes, patreon.com/leanintoart is the site that we're talking about. What is it? It's a way for you to give us a monthly upvote. If you get value out of the stuff that we create, if you believe in us and you believe in the stuff that we make, you say, hey, I want to give you guys a high five. You do that on a monthly basis for as little as $1 a month, whatever you can afford. We want to thank 5 people who've been doing exactly that. First up, Becca Hilburn, longtime supporter of the show. Probably heard us mention her before. You can find Becca on Twitter at NattoSoup, NattoSoup. Also, thanks to Owen Jolens. Speak of the devil, we're doing an episode on coloring. Owen Jolens is a professional comics colorist who I am curious what he would have to say about what we've been talking about today. You can find Owen on Twitter at Comic Colorist. Also, Mark Falk. Mark Falk, you can find on Twitter at Radimir, Radimere. These will all be in the show notes as well. And India Swift. Thank you, India, for believing in the show and us. You can find India on Twitter at Old Swifty. And finally, Casey Snipes at letter K, letter C, Snipes. And if you want to join them at patreon.com/leanintoart, you will find all the shows we make, as well as the extra leans, the shows we record once a month, only for leaners. We're recording one tonight. So if you sign up today, time you hear this, you'll be able to check out our brand newest one where it's Rob and me riffing live and coming up with topics on the fly. And it's usually some pretty good discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It has a similar, it's like Lean Into Art with a little more sass. I don't know. It's something. It's got a spice. It's a thing. It's ineffable.
It's Rob and me laying on our sides like this.
Sure.
Is that sass? I don't even know what sass is.
All right. Well, we'll find out tonight.
That's what the kids talk back to you, right?
Yes.
All right. I got to hit some music so we can do the second part of the show.
It's not the second part without the music.
All right. Well, we'll do so because we're keeping this theme of intense, being efficient, driving rhythm, pushing forward, get it done. All right. What are you thinking about, Rob?
Okay. So there's, let's see. So when we make okay, what do you mean about like the efficiencies? Let's lay that out first. Like, the first half of the show was presented as this is something that is helpful to accomplish some goals, maybe a little quicker and easier. But like, why? How did that come about?
I don't know. I was trying to think about this before we did the recording, and I was watching Brandon's video about this, and he talked about how he was trying to get the most out of less. And when he said that, I felt like a good feeling inside. This idea of like there's something that feels really good about maximizing a material. I'm going to say some words that could potentially be dangerous. Exploiting it fully, right? Not letting anything go to waste. I was recently reading some old 70s and 80s comic books, floppy newsprint comics, in which you don't typically run into very fancy coloring. There was the old flat colors that they did by cutting pieces of stuff called ruby lith to create printers plates. And so it's 4 colors is what you had to work with. And you'd see things where they would use color in this really cool compositional way to like push something into the foreground by just washing it in purple. It's a flat purple. Are things really purple when they're in shadow? Well, sometimes maybe depending on the light, but like always, and like there was one scene where it was like the background was just like a green, like a teal, and the foreground characters were just colored yellow. And it was for no other reason than to create a sense of focus. Like it wasn't like they were in like a special dimension or that like their sense of vision was being altered in any way. It was just a simple way to create focus by using these kind of unrealistic, I would say almost a romantic sense of design, if that makes sense. This poetic sense of design. And it was the efficiency drove the art in a way, if that makes sense. The way to make the colors happen with the technology they had forced them to come up with really creative ways to create clear, well-designed imagery that communicated meaning. And I remember walking away from that going like, I want to get more out of less like that.
Does this also come up because of thinking about the the drawing, the storytelling, the composition it's almost like not finished enough if it's just the line art. So is there like a line art aspect of this where it's driving how there's almost more to do with creating value in region and drawing attention as far as positive and negative space, and what are the elements, the subjects that you're meant to draw your attention and all that stuff? It's like the lines can only go so far because they're empty if they don't have these filled regions, right? I'm wondering if that like pushes this whole at least this flavor of the topic. Efficiencies is that could hit a lot of different angles. We could talk about writing, we could talk about whatever. But like in particular, is this because of line art when we're talking about coloring?
In the example I used, absolutely, right? Because the line art was designed to be colored. The line art was left room for color to do part of the work. Like you said, like defining the value, defining like the 3-dimensionality of the contour and the shape and everything. And once again, I think Brandon's video is like the perfect counterpoint to what we're talking about today, because he specifically draws in a style where the lines do more of the work, so the color doesn't have to do as much. So when you look at it, he's just dropping in like a quick gradient here. He doesn't even do like the modeling that I was doing, like in terms of like rendering out like what did he call it? Cartoon style shading, where it's like there's like a defined shadow underneath objects that are away from the light source. Doesn't do it very much. He mostly does it with just like some quick gradients and a couple textures laid over top, and it looks absolutely rendered because the line art is doing so much more. Right?
And that's because he's adding like hatching details or like lines as textures and whatnot, right? Where there's additional lines that are helping communicate the directionality of light and stuff.
Right. I'll try to pull up some of his Green Monk pages so we can see what I'm talking about.
So style affects this, right? But then, I mean, so no matter what, you show up, you're doing stuff in your style, and then there's efficiency becomes a concern when you're like, well, my deadline is sooner than I would like, or what? I did this step too many times. I'm kind of sick of this step. I know that's what happens for me.
Yeah. 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 That was one of the questions I had that I was wondering, maybe getting be final thought if we start to run low on time. Is like, a couple episodes ago, we did this discussion on mini comic layout and this algorithm that you came up with, which upon more research, you was like, oh, I'm not the first person to come up with this. But I was like, as when I walked away from that discussion, I was like, wait a second, I don't think we really discussed how he arrived at that. Right. So there's like this need where you're like, I do not want to figure this out the hard way. I don't want to like actually make like a dummy with like 32 pages in it and like map that all out on pieces of paper, which is what I would have done. Right. Like there's this moment where you say, like in the old infomercials, there's got to be a better way. Right.
It's totally that. My monitor has streaks and I just, how do I fix this? There's got to be a better way.
I want a handy appliance that can scramble an egg while it's still inside its shell.
I know.
Yeah, it's
Mr. Popeil. Weird Al Yankovic. Anyway.
Thank you. Yes. Actually, yes. Don't steal a joke without attribution.
Oh, God, steal away. I just was like, I'm on the same page with you, and that's also a reference. Like if other, helps the audience play along. If they're like, well, no, I'm curious about this Weird Al Yankovic. It's a really funny song. You should listen to it.
It is a great song. Here's a Brandon Dayton page where you can see that, like, yeah, if you really look at it, there's just a couple gradients, like on the snow. There's a little bit of color holds on inside the door. Gosh, but even the color inside is not that different. It's slightly warmer than the color outside. And then there's a texture on it. But everything else is being done with the lines. So style definitely makes a difference when it comes to this. This is on Tapas. You can read Brandon's gorgeous comic Green Monk there. Tapas.io, I should say. But yeah, so it gets to a point where when I'm coloring something like Boulder and Fleet Mining for Trouble, I have budgeted the time to do those pages. And if it takes a little longer, this is a personal project. This is something I'm really invested in. And there is a kind of pleasure that comes with noodling over it and sort of worrying over it, right? Whereas freelance work, I don't have that luxury, right? I have a budgeted time, but also I have the added friction of the client who needs the thing and they need it pretty soon, usually. So when I find myself worrying over something, worrying as in like fussing with it too much, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? I'm manually selecting each and every color and shading and having to pick the shadow color and mixing it every time. Oh my gosh, there's got to be a faster way of doing this thing, right? That will get me as close to this as possible. Without so the trade-off is like it's not going to look exactly the same as if I fuss with all the colors individually like a painter does. But how close can I get to that? And what kind of speed gains would I achieve by finding this alternate way? Also, another point of friction that leads me to look for more efficiencies is when I'm doing something for myself and I decide I'm not crazy about that background color, I can go, oh, well, I'm not touching that again. I've already spent 7 hours on it. Let it go. Right. Great art, or what is it? Art is never finished. It's abandoned, or whatever that old bromide is. When it's for a client and they go like, can you change this color, please? I'm paying you money for this. You go, okay. Unless I've got a really, really good reason to argue that point. I can't just say like, I don't feel like it, right? That color's getting changed. So can I look for efficiencies to make it as easy to edit and manipulate as possible to, so I'm not spending undue amounts of time on changes. Whoa, I lost Rob. Rob vanished. And he will be back, everybody. I am confident of that. Let's make sure I've still got internet because I don't know if it's me that went out or if it's Rob that went out. No, I've got internet all right. Okay. So efficiencies in terms of keeping it editable. Also efficiencies in terms of is it a format that the client or the person that you're creating it for can modify it or update it without you having to get involved. That's like the best of all worlds. Like if you deliver it to them, and the client can actually make any final like niggling adjustments at the end, right? So they don't have to do a lot of back and forth. How are you doing, Rob?
I dropped off the call for a good minute there.
It was your turn.
Sure what happened? It was my turn.
I mean, that usually happens to me. Like when it first happened, I honestly thought, I was like, oh, my internet went out again. But I kept things going. I vamped for a little bit. So thank you, Troy. Shadow McTronk says you're still on, Jersey. I wish the chat was a little bit more up to speed, but I appreciate you chiming in. All right, thanks. So I was just kind of closing that thought on efficiencies, or at least like efficiencies about like making it so that it's easy for me to make changes to please the client, or in best case scenario, the client can actually make the changes on their end. Like sometimes I'll set pages up that way too. So it's like, if you want to change the yellow, here it is. It's on that layer, you know?
Well, I mean, your process is, I think it needs to be affected based on the whole intent for the work. And if it's like, oh, this is a matter of you're engaging in trade, and there is a, because of how you have arranged this, this commitment with a client, yeah, if you have updates, it might make a lot of sense. I mean, to make it discreetly, easily updatable. And I mean, it makes like I don't know if this is the main style you use with your own projects. Do you use as many layers, or do you use a few fewer, or?
A few fewer with my personal stuff.
Okay.
But it's still a lot of layers. I use a lot of layers.
Well, I suppose you've practiced a particular method, so why not use it? It solves problems, right?
Right. It also creates problems in terms of storing things. Like, so I was trying to back up one of my projects recently on DVD. That old way. Remember that when you used to back stuff up on DVD?
Wow. You said the phrase, I was trying to back up a project recently on DVD.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I know, right? It's so charming. I mean, I also put on a vest and a couple of arm garters, and I had a player piano going on behind me. No, but and I found out that the book wouldn't fit on a DVD. I had to like spread it amongst multiple, and I was like, wow, this is like daisy chaining floppy disks in the old days, right? But it's like it makes me feel a little better to have one hard copy, right? I've got multiple offsite backups, but then having one hard copy also just makes me feel that much safer.
Oh yeah, I mean, back something up in multiple places. That's great. Thumb drives, though. I just going to say the word thumb drives. Anyway, so final thought. I think we're arriving at.
Yeah, there's if you walk away with anything today, thumb drives, everybody.
Thumb drives,
Don't
everybody.
use DVDs. What are you using DVDs for?
Nothing wrong with DVDs. Nothing wrong. It's it depending on the format, you can back up a good amount of data, but there's
actually, now that I think about it, I gotta look. What can a DVD hold? Like 4.5 gigs, something like that.
I forget. I used to know the different. It's like you have the 4.5, then you have got like the 8 level, then there's like the 16, and then the 24. There's kind of like a.
But you can get a thumb drive with like a lot of gigs on them.
Right, or like an SD card, micro SD card.
Right.
I've got a micro SD card that's not even the biggest, like 128 gig. No problem.
Oh my gosh.
128 gig, and it's like
I've got an SD card reader on my. Yeah. All right, I'm tossing that DVD burner out. It's like what I've had for 10 years. I'm like, hey, I'm going to use it again. Okay. Are we at final thought time?
I think so. And I think there's a lot of interesting angles. I'm curious, like if there was an angle in the vamping where my internet went out, or if there's a, all right.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Well, I do have a little checklist that I was thinking about, like, well, we kind of touched a little bit on like, well, what makes you start looking for efficiencies? And we talked about like, well, there's got to be a better way. But there's other things that I do. Like, how do you arrive at efficiencies? I think is an interesting question, right? So like going back to how did Rob arrive at that algorithm to figure out how to do impositioning for a mini comic? How do you discover techniques that speed things up? Do you invent or do you research? What does that look like, right? What do you think about that?
I think it's great. Let's give that a try.
Okay, let's do our best. All right, but before we do that, we got to thank a couple more people who make this show possible, and those people happen to be me and Rob. So I've been playing around with this Rockets page today on the show, and you can read the whole book June 12th. And it's called Science Comics Rockets Defying Gravity. And it's from First Second. And what is it? It is a comics documentary that teaches you about the science and history of rockets, but it's narrated by a bunch of grumpy animals who have participated in rocket history. So it's not just because I like drawing animals, although that is a perfectly legitimate reason to put them in the book. But Anne, I think very early on realized that this book would be much more interesting if the animals who are in it actually participated in the history that they're talking about, because then they could be emotionally involved, right? When we see a bear get tossed out of an ejector seat, the bear can actually lose his marbles and walk off of the book, and then another narrator could come in to narrate the next chapter of the book. I think it is, I'm going to make a strong statement, Rob. I think it's the funniest thing that I have participated in creating ever. I can't say it's the funniest thing I ever wrote because I didn't write all the jokes and wrote a lot of the really, really great jokes. I wrote one joke in that book that I stand by. I'm like, this is a funny joke. But also it's just like you learn about like how the laws of motion work and how rockets work. And like you learn all these really cool, interesting stories about rocket development and where they come from and who developed them and why, you know, like what were the forces at work in it wasn't just this Robert Goddard-esque like romantic love of space travel. It was also like greedy hucksters and people who wanted to eliminate all those people over there, right? Like it's a very spotted history. And you can read all about it in Science Comics Rockets Defying Gravity. It's on Amazon for pre-order now, and it's also in previews if you get your comics at comic stores. You can go to indiebound.com to find it at a local bookstore near you. Rob, you make a game. Let's talk about your game.
It sounds good. I'm so excited for the Rockets comic, and I have done my pre-order, and I hope all the leaners do that too. But yeah, the game I happen to make, that we're talking about here is called This Panda Needs You. And you're like, wait. I didn't commit to some panda and neediness and whatnot. What's this all about? And I'm gonna say, guess what? It's not actually too intense. This panda just needs your help a little bit to solve some fun puzzles. And these fun puzzles happen to be just like physics and shape and color pattern matching situations represented by some stacked blocks where this panda's walking along this nice bamboo forest and everything's cool. There's a stack of blocks. And wait a minute, a cloud shows up and knocks them all over. And that's where you come in, because you can help this panda put things right. And of course, as you're going along, the panda and the music are all celebrating your progress, and you have some hints and cues if you're making this work. And then it like starts out incredibly easy. It doesn't ever become frustratingly like one of those video games that is like severely hard level difficulty, right? It's meant for all ages.
Like when we were playing Star Wars Battlefront together, and I was not doing well, Rob.
It's nowhere near that, right? I mean, because both it's meant for all ages, and it really is. It's got that a lot of gentleness to it, where it gets a lot harder, but it's all about like, wow, there's just more blocks to manage, and there's more, you're stacking them higher and stuff, and you're dealing with physics and all that. Anyway, there's like over 50 levels, and it runs on like all sorts of devices: iPhone, iPad, Android phones and tablets. And then of course your Windows and Mac desktops. For Windows and Mac, go to itch.io and search for This Panda Needs You. Then for your other devices, go to like Google Play or the iTunes App Store and search for This Panda Needs You.
And if you've already purchased it and you haven't done this yet, give it a review wherever you purchased it. That helps more people find it. It sends a signal to the system saying, hey, people are engaging with this thing that they purchased on your platform, and it helps raise it in search rankings. But supposing that you're happy for us that we make stuff, but you're really here because you like the way we think about stuff. Especially this episode and the last episode. If you got something out of these last two where we were doing these demos to teach things, I would recommend that you go to leanintoart.com/workshops, because there's more stuff like that there. You can download self-contained video workshops at a price of your choosing, even free. You can download it for free. But if you do get value out of it, you can always go back and then purchase it again. And actually, like, it'd be like giving us a tip. You purchase it for a friend. Say, hey, I got something out of this. I think you would too. There's comics workshops. There's video game making workshops, UI workshops there. leanintoart.com/workshops. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, giving it a thumbs up helps more people find the show. That costs you nothing but a few seconds of your time. And if you're listening to it in, podcatcher, Apple iTunes, wherever you listen to the show, giving it a 5-star review helps more people find it there as well. And more people find the show, more people get value out of it, more people support it, and then the whole thing becomes utterly sustainable. And we thank everybody who has been doing exactly those things. It means a lot to us.
It really does. Thank you.
Final thought, Rob.
Final thought. So we were going to chew on the idea of, like, how do you arrive at these efficiencies?
Yeah. What do you do when you're like, there's got to be a better way?
Right. I mean, there's an emotional signal. I mean, it could show up as, some kind of frustration with repetition and/or, unapproachability, where the algorithm for the mini comic, imposition stuff, and that came from this whole, well, here I go again. And I don't know how to put this into my, I've got the pages drawn individually as if they were, just standalone pages, and I did it in Clip Studio Paint on the iPad. But then it's like, well, I need to put this, in a format where it can be printable. And and at the time I was even debating, it's like, do I want this to be sort of the quarter, 8.5 by 11 page size, or like roughly A4 quarter page size for our global folks? And do I want that, or do I want to go 2? And I thought, I'm just boggled about this layout thing again. Here I go again. I'm like, do I really need to be boggled? Is this really that big of a mystery? If I look at this, I think I can figure out the pattern, and then use that knowledge to help me decide, like, which approach do I want, and make it not an expensive experiment to try both layouts, because both layouts had really different meanings. And one where essentially there's only 2 comic pages per print physical page, right? Here we go with this language problem that we had all through that episode, at least for me. Anyway, versus 4 per side, which means then you have the other, side 1, side 2 of a physical printed page. Anyway, and I'm like, I remember, and now that I'm facing this again, I remember all this prior experience where I've done it wrong and had to redo it to get it right. And I'm like, it can't be that hard of a mystery. I think instead of just proceeding with like the physical prototype path is a great solution, Jerzy. I like, there's nothing wrong with that. But like, I was like, this little I can map this out. I know I can. And I think I'm going to stop my progress on the main project, and then make this little mini project of, how do I never have to do this again?
Right.
Anyway, so that's how it started.
Yeah, and it's similar for me, where it will come up where I remember the pain that I felt when I was watching my hourly rate slowly diminish as I was touching this project again, because the client wanted like just one more round of changes. But what they asked for, which is a simple enough thing to do, had I prepared the layers or prepared my colors utterly differently, right? Where I was like, the third time I had to like go in and re-render an entire background because they wanted it to be daytime, or they wanted it to be a different season. It's like, oh, we'd rather this be a winter story. Okay, well, now I gotta change all the colors in the background, that kind of thing. And I remember I said, like, how do I not have to? I mean, I've got these different affordances in the form of layers. Can I do layers in a way so that I can just flick a thing if I need it to be night or day? And I just put a gel on it. So there's that pain point. Nowadays, I mean, like, I've got a few checkpoints that I go through depending on my level of frustration. Like, there's having solved a few problems in the past, like when you encounter those problems, I think you very accurately described that feeling of like just being boggled. Like, well, I don't even know what I don't know in this situation yet, right? And it can almost feel like a panic at first. Like, God, I'm completely lost. I'm adrift at sea, and there's nothing to grab onto. But like, just like when you go through the creative process, like, you know that this is just part of the learning process after you've done it a couple times. But if I'm really stuck and I can't find any patterns in what I'm trying to, or if any past experience can't be drawn up to say, like, well, maybe if I tried this thing that once worked on another thing, going to YouTube is when I first stops. I go to YouTube and I just do a search for that particular problem I'm having. And usually I phrase it incorrectly. And then I find a video like 3 or 4 down where, like, oh, that's how you say what I'm trying to do, in positioning. Oh, that's what that's called. And if I can't get on a track off of based on watching a couple of videos and seeing how other people have solved similar problems, then I'll go to my inner circle, my brain trust, right? Hey, everybody, anybody run into this before? Am I crazy? Am I just like missing something that's completely obvious that you've also? And that's where like Audrey Federici of nemu-nemu.com came along and said, like, well, here's how I color to speed things up. Like, oh, this is great. And failing that, then you could always go public. Like, I see people on Twitter all the time saying, like, this is the thing I'm trying to do. Anybody can help me with this. That would be my path of like different levels of escalation.
That's a pretty robust approach. I mean, the whole there's a thing that in like software development that is I know it comes up elsewhere too, but it's this idea of really trying to get very granular with a problem early on, right? And that's something that this phrase gets thrown around called pre-optimizing. And like you mentioned adapting to constraints after they really do exist, right? Where your process, in a way, like it essentially is like this ebb and flow of, like, it may be like buying too much insurance, right? Where it's like, okay, this situation with this client, I want to be ready for it next time. It's not going to happen again. But then if it never happens again, like the adaptation you brought into your process, was it worth it, right? Maybe it's up to you, right? And
right.
Then, but likely those things, especially if you run into them a couple of times, you're like, okay, I need a solution for this. It's worth this sort of insurance, this extra step or whatever adaptation that may not cost a lot. Not every efficiency costs a lot. It just might be just doing it a little bit different. But then, like you mentioned, the whole the being efficient about adopting an efficiency, which is interesting, where you're like, okay, because this is where I kind of jumped the shark with my approach with the whole imposition, where I'm like, I'm just going to look at this I'm going to analyze the problem and observe the phenomena and come up with a pattern and turn that into an algorithm, whatever, where it's like, this was solved already. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah. Anyway, and so like you've got a step there which helps you from being trapped in the whole, like, well, now I got to solve it. It's someone might know. That seems pretty handy.
I feel like YouTube is a really good. Wait a minute, I think my OneDrive is back. Pause syncing OneDrive. I forgot to set that when we started recording. There we go. Is that better?
It didn't cause a problem yet, so no worries.
Oh, okay. I noticed that the video started.
Yep.
Anyway, I feel like I think we did a podcast.
I think so.
But yes, YouTube is like it's become my my first reflex of like, am I crazy or is this really hard? Right. And then I'll go to YouTube as my first check, like, okay, nobody else is solving this problem and has done a video about it. So now it's time to escalate and find out, like, what am I missing here? But yeah. And it is a publicly used video platform. So you find all kinds of different qualities of approaches to solving the problem, and sometimes really novel ones.
And even if it's a little bit, off or incomplete or something, it's a stepping stone, right? It starts to where you start to triangulate. Oh, okay, this whole term is called imposition. Like I would have never arrived at that as my step one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I think we did a podcast, and I think this was a fun discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Jerzy.
We can always. Well, I would be curious what the leaners have to say about what we did today. If they have any tips that we can maybe do like a part 2, where it's like, here's a bunch of people who have chimed in with their different approaches, their different efficiencies. I guess the call to action would be is like, what's one thing that you said there's got to be a better way, and then you landed on this new efficiency and you cling to it now, right? This is like your go-to, where it's like, oh, I'm in trouble. Time to pull out my Excalibur efficiency.
That would be, I would be super curious to learn that. So yeah, please do. I mean, we'll share some ways to reach out to us.
Actually, in just a minute,
like a minute,
like less than a minute, in like 20 seconds, you're going to hear it. So get your pencils out, because we record the show every Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern time, 9 p.m. Central. And we stream it live on YouTube, and then it's collected as a podcast at patreon.com/leanintoart. Thank you once again for this discussion, Rob. It's always fun to talk with you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jerzy.
And until next time, I have been Jerzy Drozd of Lean Into Art and Jerzy Drozd on Instagram.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on the gram.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
All right. I'm going to shut off the stream. Thanks for hanging out, everybody.
Yes, thank you.